Thanks, Martin. Thanks everyone for coming along today. The response has been overwhelming. Obviously, Ruth set the scene of her experiences of adoption across many more industries, but I'm going to narrow the focus down and detail the draft genetics adoption strategy. If I can get this to work. So to help build up this story, I'm going to talk very briefly about the development and some of the issues and barriers to adoption of genetics that we're seeing today. I'll flick forward to the future and give you my impression of what the future could look like, and then how the adoption plan that I'm going to roll out may help us achieve this. And I'll have 4 pillars, but most importantly, following my presentation, I'm looking for your feedback to determine whether I'm making the right direction or there's any gaps in this plan. So as you're all very well aware, we've had genetic evaluation around in Australian livestock industries for over 30 years. We've seen the introduction of new traits, economic weightings through indexes, the merging of a few different evaluations to form sheep genetics. We've moved into the genomic era, and then single step being rolled out for some breeds and a lot of traits for the sheep industry. And whilst the guys in sheep genetics have done a great job at increasing the use of ASBs across the merino industry since 2005, still to this day, 2/3 of rams are being sold without ASBVs. It's a similar story up here in the northern beef sector, where nearly 2/3 of studs are not involved in breed plan. The key barrier and issue, or the initial one, is a lack of value proposition. This is both the stud selling animals, when their competitor studs may be getting higher premiums and they're not having any genetic evaluation with those animals. There's no demonstration holistically across the industry of the value of genetics. There's no clear incentive to improve, particularly in the last couple of years when we've seen strong livestock prices. The better animals, the better genetic animals are not getting any more premiums. It's a complex and difficult language. We need to realise that a lot of people in this room are probably living and breathing breeding values on a daily basis. But outside these walls, for the standard commercial producer, looking at a bull or a ram buying guy and getting blown away with 20 EBVs or ASBVs is quite confronting. And it's a difficult system, so it takes a lot of time and effort and labour going into recording, particularly in extensive geographies, and the time taken to submit that data. There's a resource and knowledge gap out there. I think we've got a group of very trained and expert advisors to the leading end of the stud stock industry, and obviously those studs are making massive genetic gain, but I think we've left behind the rest of the bigger proportion of the industry, and it's mainly due to a lack of resources. And then there's an issue with culture and lack of trust, which has been mentioned a couple of times today. There's a lack of trust for the data going into these evaluations, and then of the evaluations coming out the back end. And obviously everyone's seen the issues with visual appraisal. It is extremely important when selecting sires, but the genetic component is equally important. So flicking forward to the future, and we've had a really good look today at what the future could look like. And I think it's very important that we keep the consumer outcome focused and have a value chain approach to genetics. And underpinning that will be the data platform that we are going to build, and most importantly, the tools to be able to use that data appropriately. And obviously underpinning that will be genetic and genomic data, we will have commercial data going into that to help increase accuracy of selection and hopefully a multi-breed analysis sooner rather than later. But where I'm going to take the genetic adoption focus is a little bit away from the traditional. We've traditionally focused on converting studs to become part of evaluations, and then obviously if the commercial sector are buying those bulls or rams, then they're obviously genetically improving their herds. But if we've got 2/3 of the studs not using these evaluations, they're most likely flatlining as far as genetic gain goes. So a fair bit of my initial focus will be on the commercial sector and upskilling the bigger proportion of the industry, and then hopefully it'll lead to a demand and converting some of those stud stock sectors. It doesn't mean I'm going to not pay any attention to the stud sector or the advanced sector. I think it's incredibly important we continue to have all the tools you've heard about today adopted and maximise genetic gain across the industry. So what does initial success look like for a commercial producer? It's quite simple. It's having clear breeding values and have the knowledge and the ability to use breeding values and the tools related to that. Now we need to actually develop some of these tools because they're not available to commercial producers currently. And therefore driving demand for animals with breeding values, which are getting scarcer and scarcer in some sectors, and hopefully drive some change in some of that seed stock sector. It'd be great if we could see a positive index by price correlation, which we're currently not seeing. And then using value chain feedback, and hopefully the data platform will help that, but to make genetic and whole farm management decisions to improve productivity in their herd or flock. So the first component of the genetics adoption strategy is demonstrating value and growing demand. And the first key tactic is commercial producer case studies. It's not terribly innovative, and it's definitely not new. We've used case studies for years to tell good stories. But I've seen in MLA conducted some market research in 2016, and I've seen a similar result in other market research I've been involved with. Peer producers are some of the most trusted advisors of other producers. They are looking at what they're doing, and they take advice from them much more than any of the other parts of the sectors. And rather than getting studs up there and telling them about how much genetic gain they've made, let's get commercial producers out there. And it doesn't just have to be limited to commercial producers. It could be feedlotters, processors, stock agents, telling how genetics has been one tool that they've implemented on their property to increase productivity, so kilograms of meat per hectare, increase in reproductive performance, increase in eating quality through MSA index, showing how that has been one of the tools and an important tool they've implemented in their whole farm management system. Develop this into a genetics campaign, and this is a standalone campaign. It's not an individual case studies here and there. It's going to have clear, consistent key messages, reinforcing the productivity benefits that can be harnessed from genetic improvement, plus all the other factors that go into the productivity on farm, and delivered through the right platforms. And you all know the right platforms you're using. They're online systems at the moment. Social media is a growing one, but also methods such as print and Feedback magazine. We need to leverage the current R&D projects that are happening. We're seeing massive differences in the genetic potential of size that are out there in the industry. The Repronomics project, for example, is showing massive reproductive performance differences between size you're all very aware of out there. So we need to make that aware across the broader industry. We need to develop demonstration sites involving ideally both stud and commercial producers, and we need to coach these guys and girls through increasing massive genetic gains in the stud sector, but also coach the commercial sector and how they can improve their ram or bull choices over a period of 5 years or more. And the second part of this strategic goal is about growing the demand, and we do have some demand signals to improve, and it's about connecting genetics to current incentives, and one of the current incentives is MSA. So Mick started the day saying that MSA YG cattle that graded versus ungraded, there was a $65 premium out there. Yes, there are some premium breed-related markets out there where some premiums are available, but I think we need to do a better job. So we really need to grow the demand to value good genetics and good performance of animals in the industry. And it was great to hear Tom talk to how important genetics is in value-based marketing, because I think that's the first step in valuing good genetics. We need to do it in a balanced approach to make sure we're not affecting other traits such as reproduction, but I think we need to incentivise producers to continually improve their productivity on farm. And it doesn't stop with the processor. We need to look for ways to value good genetics coming into the feedlot, and I think genomics may be an initial opportunity there. And it's not just valuing the good genetics, we need to make sure we're providing the good advice and the guidance to the producers when we're giving feedback. So if their cattle or their lambs have underperformed, we need to give them advice and guidance on how they can improve and get that premium next time. So if we've created awareness through a campaign, we need to deliver a pathway to learning and an education source. So my idea is develop a genetics network, and this is what it currently looks like in my opinion. We've got some really good technical experts that are sitting with AGBU, SBTS, TBTS. We've got some extension consultants and some breeds that offer some high-end service to the seed stock sector. And we do have a handful of programs focused on the commercial producer, but they're hit and miss at the moment. So it's about inclusion and including all the stakeholders that are in this room into the genetic conversations. It's the livestock agents being involved in the conversations, the vets, the repro service. These are some of the most trusted advisors and talking to producers all the time. It's the lecturers who are teaching the next generation, making sure they're saying the right things about genetics and breeding values, and obviously the processors and feedlots in the feedback they're giving back to these the producers. So it's about education, training and updates. It's alignment and coordination within this network and a good opportunity to provide feedback to make sure we're doing the right things. And this is the first part of forming the genetics network. So this was actually a pilot program, as you heard earlier, that we were only expecting 50 or 60 people today. So it's fantastic to see the response that we've had and the spectrum of different people across the industry, particularly livestock agents, vets and commercial producers who we don't normally get along to a genetics event. We're going to take this out into a more regional level, so a more geographically relevant forum, and obviously species as well. But be smart about it as well. Leverage existing programs and networks and integrating genetics conversation within those. We need to keep those leading people working in the genetics world trained. So it's train the trainer, make sure they are having the same message and saying the same things between programs. And that comes from the top, from the experts from AGBU. And we need to continue this engagement momentum throughout the year in between the conference and the forums. And it's going to be initially a bit of a shotgun approach. I'm not a true believer in the email approach or the printed material, but we will still go out through those channels. But I think there's much more merit in short videos, whether it be a case study or some key messages coming through a 2 to 5 minute video where people can find time to get some key messages across in their busy working lives. And then identify gaps in resources and programs and address these. And we always need to remember that we need to deliver it in a whole farm approach, not just genetics. We need to deliver genetics alongside good breeder management, how we need to test our bulls. We need to deliver genetics in with pasture management, and how we can increase eating quality, hit MSA indexes or higher MSA indexes. The third pillar is simplify the language and the tools. And again, this is not new, but we need to simplify breeding values. This is probably the easiest way you can look at breeding values currently available. But to get to this through the Breed Plan website, it's quite complex. You've got to understand how to filter through 20 plus traits and put search criteria, and then eventually you might get some sires out, and then you've got to click on this table. I think we can do even better than this, and we can look at possibly trait grouping in fertility and growth and create some sub-indexes. Because this is, if you think about it, this is all a commercial producer comes to a sale. All we need them to really understand. They don't need, if they really want to find out information, we can make that available in the background, but we don't want to blow them away with too much information like we have for the last 30 years. We have the similar instance in the sheep world where there's over 70 traits that we have breeding values for. We already have quite a pretty good selection tool, but I think we can take some learnings from the dairy industry, and Ruth touched on it briefly before. The dairy industry have a balanced performance index, and they've got an 80% confidence rating amongst the producers who are using it, or across the general population of producers. A confidence rating meaning that 80% of the producers are confident that the traits and the weightings within those traits clearly represent their production system. We're nowhere near that with our beef and sheep indexes, use and understanding. And it's not complex, it's about engagement and involvement, just like they did in the dairy world, Australia's longest farm walk. It's having buy-in and engagement throughout the process, and therefore they have the understanding and the buy-in for the tools. And speaking of tools, we need to develop easy-to-use tools. Some of these exist in the sheep sector. We need to make it easy to select sires. Need to be able to benchmark commercial herds. We have a sheep CRC flock profile. They can get a genetic representation of their flock and then they can be coached on how they can improve the genetic merit of their flock over years. And if you don't think this can be done, or you think I'm dreaming, I dare you to download the Good Bulls app and have a play around with it. And this is my ideal state for the beef industry. Update the online platforms and websites. So this is about making all this look and feel and interact the same way. This is not an overnight change, but discussions are underway already, but this is where I'd like to take the industry and genetic evaluations into the near future. And the fourth pillar is making sure we align adoption and R&D. And we've heard a lot about the R&D today, but we need to make sure we continue to do the right R&D. And I think the NLGC have some great strategic imperatives to address the issues and barriers that we're currently facing today. So they're all about maximising genetic gain, but that's of no use or no value to the industry unless it's adopted. So it's making sure that this technology is adopted as quickly as possible in the industry. And how we do that is to have a clear adoption plan at the start of the R&D rather than the traditional approach, which is conduct the R&D and then work out how we're going to fit it into the industry. We need clear and monitoring and evaluation guidelines, and that's monitoring genetic gain, that's monitoring improvements in productivity, and then the change in adoption, so the change in confidence in both the use of the tools. And it reduces the timeline from R&D to adoption. So as I said, this is a draft adoption plan, and we're going to continue to monitor and evaluate this plan for success. Obviously we can do some market research, but more importantly we want feedback through these forums and workshops we plan to conduct. And we need to maximise producer engagement outside these four walls, and adjust it obviously as necessary. So in summary, it's about demonstrating the value of genetics to a wider audience than that we have here today, and grow the demand, incentivise people and producers to a change and improve what they're doing on farm. We need a pathway to learning, so once we've created that awareness, they've got to access the information. We need to simplify the language and the tools for the people that aren't living in this breeding value world on a day-to-day basis. And we need to align adoption to R&D to make sure that we're adopting and maximising genetic gain at all stages. So thank you very much.